Welcome to Men Answering the Heroic Call. I'm Tom Hornacek with Dean Patterson. On this podcast, Dean and I want to help equip you for this battle of life we wake up to each day. The word heroic refers to actions or qualities that demonstrate great courage, bravery, and self sacrificing love. These actions rise up during difficult situations in our lives requiring a heroic response. No one goes to battle alone. As men of Christ,
Each episode, Tom and I will cover truths about the Catholic faith, maybe stories from our life or our guests that help us grow as the men that God has made us to be. So we pray you join us each episode as we look at challenges and pitfalls in life as well. Help us to overcome those and answer our heroic call as men. And Tom, we've been focused on this Catholic man crisis, of course, over the episodes. We have guests that are actually part of the solution, and today we're excited to have Pete with us. Why don't you, if you don't mind, give a little bit about our guests and we'll begin to talk to him.
great. Again, we're joined by Pete Burak. Pete is the Vice President of Renewal Ministries in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a ministry dedicated to Catholic renewal and evangelization around the world, mission work for them. He's a graduate of Franciscan University in Steubenville. He has a master's degree in theology from Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, Michigan. Pete is a frequent speaker on discipleship, evangelization. He's co-director of Pine Hills Boys Camp, and he's a monthly columnist for Faith Magazine and a host of two podcasts, Spirit-Filled Leadership and The Hour. Pete and his wife, Kate, have 5 children. Thanks for joining us, Pete. Oh, by the way, his latest book is the reason why we're having him on. It's called Choosing Courage and Chasing Adventure, A Man on Purpose, 10 Rules.
Yeah,
Tell
good to
us,
be with you guys.
you too. Thank you. What led you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and there should be a ready answer. The obvious answer, maybe the annoying answer, is the Holy Spirit. I finally, at some point, felt permission from the Lord to put pen to paper or fingers to keys, I guess, as it were. But the main inspiration was kind of twofold. One was kind of an existential thing, and then one was a particular experience. So the existential thing was I was just in all the work that we've been doing with young men and men of all ages, as you guys referenced there. There's no doubt a crisis of masculinity in our world right now. We really don't know collectively as a society what it means to be a man, not just in the even a biological sense, but just in a kind of how do we act? What do we move? What does it look like to have contribution? What does it look like to live a full, robust masculinity? And I've noticed that there were kind of two competing narratives that emerged that were both problematic. One on one side, kind of out of the sexual revolution, this idea that to be a man is inherently bad, that we should be ashamed of our manhood, that men have done horrible things throughout all history in the name of kind of masculinity, and therefore we need to emasculate men. We need to diminish manhood. We need to, again, kind of sideline our masculinity out of shame and just be less of kind of that innate desire of who we are. That's on one side. And then on the other side emerged an equally problematic message, in many ways in reaction to the first one, which is this kind of what I'm kind of unaffectionately calling like uber masculinity, this hyper masculinity. To be a man is inherently good, and therefore all of the desires of manhood for sexual conquest and authority and power and pleasure and all those things should be filled and should be pursued to the fullest extent with no constraints at all. This idea like that to be a man means I've got a great beard and I smoke cigars and I have as many women as I possibly can, and all this kind of hyper masculinity on the other side. And so both messages are very problematic, but both are very prevalent. And we're seeing it in either young men are being swept into this idea that I should be ashamed of being a man, or I need to be this uber man. And so I was feeling this problem of like, well, we need to present the truth, which is Jesus, which is the fullness of what manhood is can be found in Jesus, like that middle way, if you will, of a messaging that I just felt like wasn't being consistently proclaimed and modeled. So that was kind of like the big picture. And then there was a particular moment where I was preaching at a parish mission. I think it was in Indiana or Illinois. And I was sharing this story of something my dad did with me on my 16th birthday, which involved like kind of a rite of passage thing, which we might get into, and it involved writing some letters. And afterwards, this woman approached me and she said, "My husband just left our family, and I have a 15-year-old son who's about to turn 16." And she said, "I'm really concerned about who's going to form him." And she said, "Would you be willing to write him a letter?" And I said, "No." I'll pray for him, but I don't know what I would say to him. I don't know him at all." And she said, "Okay, I understand." She said, "Well, what about would you write him a book?" And I said, or she said, do you have a book? Not write him a book. Did you have a book that I could give him?" And I was like, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a book out there that I could think of. I'll pray about it and let you know." So that night, as I was trying to fall asleep in the very uncomfortable parish rectory beds, if you've ever slept there, you know that those are not great night's sleeps. Yeah, I was kind of tossing and turning, and I was thinking about this woman and her son, and I was praying for them. And I felt like the Holy Spirit said, "Well, why don't you write that book?" And so that's kind of where the book came from, is this big existential vision of like, we need a new presentation of what it means to be a man, and this woman and her son, and trying to kind of write something that maybe she and he would be able to read and benefit from.
Are you seeing, I'm just curious about trends you're seeing, men. We know that God's made us to be spiritual leaders of our homes, protectors, providers. You talk about the Uber man, excuse me, Catholic man, the Uber man, and then the toxic masculinity, or the shaming of man. I guess, what are you seeing out there in terms of, I don't know, I want to call it trends, but is there anything out there that we need to, I guess, fix or address most when it comes to the way men are leading their homes and their own lives?
Yeah, that's a big topic, Dean. Well, I guess it depends on how long you want to spend on this, but I would say maybe, well, what's really interesting and distressing is how attractive the Uberman messaging is, especially for young guys. There's Netflix just came out with a documentary about, called Into the Manosphere, or Inside the Manosphere, and it's all about this online presence of these influencers who have these enormous followings, primarily with younger guys, and they call it the Manosphere. And what they do in the documentary is they reveal how much of a facade it is, how fake it is, how like shallow it is, how kind of frankly pathetic the lives are of these guys who present themselves as rich, fit, the envy of every guy and the desire of every woman kind of thing, right? And what's so amazing, what's underladen through that whole thing is it's just the kind of the eternal temptations for men are just woven into it, and these guys are just giving into it to the fullest, with no sense of virtue, no sense of kind of any constraint on their behavior, and it's presented as like, my life is amazing, like I am fulfilled, like this is what life is all about. And then you scratch at the surface even a little bit, and it's like, oh, that's not true at all. And so what I find, one of the trends that you asked is this idea that the way to happiness is actually through discovering your desires, kind of validating and affirming your desires, and then living those desires to their fullest. And that will fulfill you. That will make you happy, because then you'll be free and you'll be able to be who you want to be. And it's this, instead of like, I think, therefore I am, it's like, I feel, therefore I am. We're one of the major trends is young people are just completely enslaved to their feelings. Feelings are wonderful companions on the journey of life, right? We need feelings. Even men need feelings. Even you, Dean, need to have feelings, and to recognize that feelings are inevitable in the journey of life. But feelings cannot be our leaders. You can't be led by your feelings. When you're led by your feelings, it actually leads to slavery. And so these guys are just like one big raw nerve of feeling, trying to pursue their feelings to the fullness. And it's actually enslaving them. And that's, I think, one of the major trends, that beliefs that younger people have bought into, is just like, no, in order to be, have the fullness of life that I want, I have to be free. But in order to be free, I have to be determined. I have to determine for myself what life is all about.
Well, it goes so counter to, I had a wonderful father, but I didn't really appreciate him until I was probably middle age. He was very sacrificial, amazing Catholic man. Never fully prospered, like you're talking about guys who are uber fit and, living this amazing life. He had we had a great life. And, it's on me, though, I think, as I got older, to realize just how important a father was by his example. Have you got and I think that's how God made us, is that we are meant to be, yeah, leaders of our house, but by sacrificial means, by humility, role models as well, and talking to others. In the book, you do a great job, I think, of laying some of that out. Any stories come to mind, or role models in your life that?
Well, one thing in particular too is, you mentioned it just earlier, was your father and the rite of passage. Kind of explain that to our viewers, because you've told us that you've gotten a lot of feedback on the book since then, and that was one of the things that really struck.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on, Dean, and we can unpack, is one of the chapters too, is just, I call it the Dead Man's Club, but we can get back to that. Or my dad called it the Dead Man's Club. And it should be noted that every chapter in the book is just a story or series of stories of lessons I learned from my dad. That's the 10 rules of life from a faithful father. I'm not the faithful father he was. I'm just learning from it. And I like to joke that, it's a very short book because the publisher said that men don't read long books, which is a little insulting, but also true.
That's true.
And there's no footnotes in it. There was no research. It's just a series of stories and lessons to pull from those stories, because there's plenty of sociological work out there to discuss like the big picture. This is just trying to lay out a bit of a roadmap of what it looks like. So as Tom, as you mentioned, on my 16th birthday, my dad orchestrated this very significant moment where I was invited into something that I didn't know I needed to be invited into, or something was bestowed on me that I didn't even realize I needed. So I came home from school that day and my dad was waiting for me and he said, "Hey, change your shirt. We're going on an adventure." The adventure part was not unusual. He called everything an adventure. Everything, we could go to Myers grocery store and it was an adventure to dad. So we got in the car and we started driving through Ann Arbor and down Washington Avenue, took a right into Paisano's restaurant. Didn't go in the front door, went in the side door and walked into this little banquet room. And arguably the six most important men in my life were waiting for me there. Our parish priest, another priest, my uncle, my grandfather, my brother. And my dad turned to me and he said, "It's your 16th birthday, and tonight we're going to talk to you about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a man of God." He said, "So sit right there and pay attention." And so we sat at this big table and for the next few hours ate, delicious Italian food. And each of the guys went around the table and read me a letter about that they had written me about what it meant to be a man of God from their perspective. And then at the end of the night, my dad collected the letters and put them in a binder with about 10, 15 other letters. And he stood in front of all the other men and they prayed with me and they prayed over me. And then he kind of took the binder. I'll never forget this. And he like slapped it across my chest. And he said, "Son, we love you. We're proud of you. We believe in you. You can ask us for anything," he said, "except for money." And then he said, "But this is who you are now. This is the standard. This is what we're going to be holding you to. And we're behind you 100%, but this is what we expect of you." And he kind of hit me again. He says, "So go do it." You know, Man, I walked out of that room a different guy. I walked in a little boy, and did not walk out a finished product by any means, but I was given a vision. Something had been bestowed on me of like, this is what it means to be a man. This is the standard. This is what we're holding you to. This is the new club that you've been invited into. And through most of human history, almost every society has some sort of rite of passage for its boys to help them know that they're a man. It's like go off into the woods, and if you survive the night, you come back to the village, and you're a man now. Like there's this moment or series of moments where boys kind of go from the domestic life into a life out in the public with impact, with danger. With It's when they start to serve in the military, or they become the hunter gatherers, or they learn a trade, or they begin to start their own families. There's this commissioning, there's this sending that happens, there's this launching. And if you think about our society right now, one of those like phrases that you hear a lot, like the failure to launch for guys. You have a bunch of guys who are in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s who look like men on the outside, but are little boys on the inside. They actually haven't learned, and part of the reason they haven't learned is because older men haven't bestowed on them, haven't spoken into them a new vision of life, and then not only taught them it, modeled it, but then sent them into it and said, like, this is what we expect of you now. And that process is so critical. It's important for women, but it's vitally, vitally important for boys.
Happening by accident today more than intention, like your dad did. I'm amazed. Be interesting to know about your grandfather. I'm just wondering, how's the guy formed like that? Because maybe a lot of our listeners right now, Tom, I don't know about you, but so men outside of our fathers as well have a great deal of influence, don't they, Pete? I mean, we are now, I think by your description too, it didn't take long to get into what social media means to the new generation. And I'm often, when I talk to groups or men, or women have no problem sharing their concerns about the men in their lives and what influence they aren't having. They're in their man cave, they work too much, they, or younger generation gaming all night long. What good is it? And you hear these things all the time. The difference is we're taking in these images, we're taking in role models, whether they're real or they're on social media. And I think I just love the story, because I think I wish I was you right now, because I think just to have that kind of father that intentionally gathers men, good men of God, to send that message is so huge. It's just so huge and so lost right now.
No, it really is. And as you said, Dean, it's like it's not like rocket science here in the sense of it just took a pretty normal guy. My dad, I mean, if you saw him, if he was on this call with us, this stream, you wouldn't have been like, oh my gosh, look at that guy. I mean, he was a pretty normal guy who accomplished some great things. He was a college baseball player, and he, started a business that was successful and everything. But it wasn't like he was unique in some ways in his creativity. What he was incredibly intentional, and he was incredibly prayerful in the sense. And this sounds like so obvious, but believe it or not, my dad actually spent time in prayer every day, asking the Lord for insight and wisdom on how to raise his sons. And he didn't do it in isolation. He did it with my mom, and he did it with the other men of the community. But I know that my dad prayed all the time for wisdom. Say, Holy Spirit, help me to know what to do with my kids at each stage of their life. And so a lot of this stuff that I share in the book, he just got either in prayer, or he would be at a business conference and say, hey, that's a pretty good idea. They just did this for business leaders. Why couldn't we do this in our home? Or he would be watching a sport, think about some of the things coaches would do with their sports teams. And then my mom was an incredible collaborator in all this, and she was creative, and the two of them worked together, and she supported it. I mean, it takes a village in many ways to raise the kid, but it also takes a great partnership of husband and wife. And you can see how powerful it was, like at times where my mom, like some families would insist that their children clean up after dinner, right? And we did. We would clear the dishes. But my mom knew that my brother and I needed time with my dad. And a lot of times the only time we had was right after dinner. And so for most of my life, we would clear the dishes, and she would have already cooked the meal, but she would also do the dishes because she knew that that was time. That was about an hour that I could spend with my dad playing. And we would play. I mean, every day when we just knew after dinner time was playtime with dad. And if it was, sometimes it was outside, sometimes it was in the basement, sometimes it was, and there was just two of us. So I understand bigger families are different. We have 5 kids. That's a little different now. It's hard for me to do playtime with a 13-year-old girl all the way to a 3-year-old girl. So it looks different for every, but the principle is there, right? So now I don't have the same ability to do what my dad with me, but I have to now apply that principle to say, "Oh, Holy Spirit, help me to understand what does it look like for me to have fun and quality time with my children in the circumstance of the life that you've given me." And it's amazing when you actually pause and listen, he does provide real insight as to how we can do it.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because growing up in the grocery business since I was 5 years old, working the store, is all day you're at work and you got the guard up and you're taking care of people and you're handling problems. And then you come home and of course you just want to, and this is most men, whatever work they do, they're just like, man, I just want to relax. I just want to take it easy. And I had 2 daughters. My oldest daughter was deaf, which meant we had a lot of extra work with her because we brought her up to speak. And so after dinner, we'd go out and shoot baskets. We'd go for a bike ride. We would do something together, work on something. And I do it? No. My feelings didn't want me to do it, but you did it because I was supposed to do it. And so when you're mentioning that, Pete, I think that is a big thing too, Dean, that men are missing is that time with their kids. Get off the devices and just go spend time together. Do something together. Even if it's a bike ride or shooting baskets catch. All those things are so much more important. And
Yeah, because in American society in particular, we have idolized and worshiped efficiency and convenience. So we tend to think that the only things worth doing are things that we can do efficiently and things that can be done kind of quickly and conveniently. And fatherhood is just remarkably inefficient and inconvenient. Like the best parts of fatherhood never come at the best at the time we'd like. And it's never as efficient as we want because it's life. It's life on life. And life is just not usually very efficient, and it's often very inconvenient. I mean, like Tom, you just gave an example. We could go around and around and around for the next 2 hours telling stories of the inconvenience of fatherhood, of all the times where the son wants to play catch and you're dead tired, or the fridge dies, and so we have to fix that, and before or the fridge is dead and you need to fix it, but the boy wants to go ride a bike and you gotta, okay, what do we do here? Like there's tons and tons of stories of that. And I just think we've so lionized and held up in such esteem the efficient man, the competent man, and then a life that is luxurious and convenient. In reality, like the best part of life is often remarkably inefficient and remarkably inconvenient. And yet then those are the stories we end up telling. Those are the memories we end up making when it flows through that lens. And yet day in and day out reject that in the pursuit of pleasure or the pursuit of comfort or the pursuit of just kind of like being able to check the box.
Is there any chapter in the book, Pete, that has gotten the most response? A favorite chapter, something you think is a message that really needs to get out there, or something that's drawn the most response? You can pick on what you comment on.
Yeah, that's a mean question. That's hard to, how do you pick a chapter? That's like picking a favorite kid or, like, I don't know. I love them all, but no, actually it corresponds. Chapter 5 is my favorite chapter, and it's the one that I've gotten the most feedback for. And I remember writing it, and at the end of writing it, I thought that was different. In fact, it was so different that I ended up rewriting chapters 1 through 4 because the voice and the tone and the kind of style that emerged in chapter 5 kind of reset the deck. And so it's my favorite chapter because I kind of felt like it was the chapter that unlocked the book for me. And the chapter is all about passion and pursuing passion. And the story that kind of lays the foundation of it, or the adage my dad had, was he used to say, "Remember, Pete, always touch the water, always touch the water." And what he meant by that was it was kind of his version of seize the day. So very practically, I have memories of us like driving by a body of water and my dad spontaneously pulling over so that we could go down and touch it. And sometimes it just meant put our hand in, but sometimes it meant jump in full on, because he just had discovered that, adventure always awaited when you go down and figure out a way to touch the water. Again, just very literally, but then also when you expand that, what it meant really was when you have an opportunity to do something, do it. Pursue a passion. And what was interladen in that was this willingness, and like this willingness to fail, to not be afraid of failure, and a willingness to risk. And one of the things my dad taught me was like all the best things in life are risky. Anything worth doing is risky. Great business is risky. Great marriage is risky. Great fatherhood is risky. Great friendships are risky. Great sporting teams are risky. You got to put something on the line. You got to lay something down. You got to really go for something. And as you do that, inevitably, it's not going to go exactly as you planned, and you're going to fail. But like anybody knows, you learn often more from failure than you do from victory. And if you never learn how to fail, you'll never learn how to win. And if you never overcome the fear of failure, you'll never actually be able to pursue a life that's higher than just the mundane. And it ultimately comes down to just like not playing life. Now, I think we have a lot of guys who have been self-medicated, who've been kind of beaten into submission by the world, who just are kind of gliding by. They just want to just get along. It's another chapter, but this idea of being a nice guy instead of a good man. They just want to be nice. They just want to have a nice life. And what that looks like is they sports gamble too much, they drink too much, they play too many video games, they have ideas for businesses that they'll never do. They really want to be married, but they're not really willing to ask anybody out because what if they get rejected? They really want to have kids, but what if they don't have enough money for it? They have all these different things, all these different excuses for why not to enter into life full on. And so I think it's a chapter of the book that resonated because I think we've all experienced it in ourselves, is that unwillingness to risk. And then B, we're seeing it in our culture as the effect of when men play it safe, society suffers, for sure. When men play it safe, society suffers. And we're seeing that where we have a bunch of guys who are just kind of weak and sitting on the sidelines, or a different, not virtuous men who are actually entering into the fray, and we need those good men to come in and actually provide leadership.
Where does that intersect with a person of faith? So there's always a fine line between pursuing my passion and what's selfish and what's of God. And who do I defer to? How in my prayer life do I really receive, or I guess embrace the right path?
Yeah, and that's why it's good that it comes in chapter 5, not in chapter 1, right? So chapter 1 is all about identity. If you don't know who you are, and you don't know who God has told you, who said that you are, who the Lord has made you to be, then yeah, we can get in all sorts of problematic outcomes. And then we also need to be obedient. We need to be obedient to his will, and we have to believe that he's communicating his will, and we have the potential to understand it and act in it. On kind of maybe a different way to answer that though, Dean, is like I think I think a lot of guys are stuck in a certain discernment paralysis, and they've made it far more complicated than they need to. And when in reality, it's like, is it sinful? If it's sinful, then you shouldn't do it. There's no such thing as like pursuing your passion and kind of validating sin. So if the church and the Lord has ruled something sinful, you don't have to discern it. Don't do it. Like there's no time to discern sin. Boom. So once you set off that whole section of things that you might want to do, then it becomes like, let's just relax a little bit and see what do you like to do? If it's not sinful, then why not pursue it? Why not move in it? Now it needs to be ordered, right? We can't be, I mean, like Michigan football is not objectively sinful. Yet we can have an undue attachment. I do probably, or I did. The Lord had to free me from my over obsession of love of Michigan football. And so there is a way at which we still need to submit all of our passions and our desires, but especially when it comes to like big things of like, what do we want to do with our life? How do we want to serve people? How do we want to love people? How do we want to bring contribution to the world? To offer that to the Lord and then really like have an active discernment, like do things with it. Actually start to move in the passions and the desires and the dreams that the Lord's given you, and trust that along the way you're going to make mistakes and you'll need to repent, and trust there's going to be times where you probably start to wander in a direction the Lord doesn't want, and he'll course correct. But to really just, I think, take a slightly more relaxed, joyful approach where, again, if it's not sinful, then at the very least, I can start to pursue it, knowing that if it's good, true, and beautiful, then it's worth pursuing. And as I pursue that, the Lord will clarify and help me to understand how best to live that out.
Tom, I'll give you the last right of refusal, or what? I guess last opportunity here to explore this.
Well, and you mentioned this in the book, and a lot of men are just kind of floating through life. Are you in it to win it? Regardless of it's work or your family or other events outside or sports, you know, and you mentioned, am I playing the game at half speed? Just kind of keeping my options open. And a lot of guys are living that way, Pete, and they're missing so much. I guess that's it. Are you going to fail? Yeah. It's the only way you learn. I do stupid stuff all the time, but the Lord knows I'll do it. So I get the ideas and I discern, like you said, if it's not sinful, like he wants me to do it. And that discernment, but it's like, why did pick Peter? He couldn't read, he was illiterate, whatever, but he could make a decision. He took responsibility, he acted. And so
No, I mean, I think that's such an underdeveloped skill right now. It's both a spiritual quality and a human quality. There's a spiritual component of wanting to be surrendered to the Lord's will and recognizing, like in Jesus talks about in John 15, like if you are my friends, if you do what I command you, right? To be a friend of Jesus is to obey him. If you want to abide in him, you have to obey him. And the more we obey him, the more we walk with him, the more we're transformed, the more we're grafted to the vine, and the more we actually experience God's life in us. So there is a spiritual component to it. But there's also just like a very human temporal component of, like I'm the generation that was never allowed to fail. So, excuse me, I grew up with participation trophies. I grew up with all sorts of certificates to acknowledge and it wasn't even so much participation trophies that I have a problem with. I like incentivizing kids to participate. It was more like when you get a trophy for like fifth place or seventh place, or this idea like you failed, but we're still going to reward you. It's like this misplaced desire to protect kids from suffering. And of course, we want to minimize suffering in our children, and we want to do things in order to protect them from undue suffering. But there's a difference of suffering between like being bullied at school, which we absolutely want to root out and protect. That's no good. That's not helpful. That's not productive. Can a kid still learn from it? Of course, the Lord can work for good for all things, right? For those who believe. But there's a difference between that kind of suffering and rooting that out, and like I skinned my knee as I ran down the sidewalk at full speed. Like those two are not the same thing. Or I played in a sporting event and we lost, and now I have to learn from the losing, as opposed to the bullying or some other types of suffering. And we've done so much to try to protect kids from all forms of suffering that we've actually, I think, actually neutered their ability to have the grit and perseverance and the great joy and the freedom that comes from, wow, I failed, 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 and now I've learned and I've succeeded. Just quick story, like I'm coaching my son's baseball team. Last year we did not win a game. Okay, we went 10-1. So the best we did was we tied. And we deserved that. Like we were not good. And it was like, and we didn't sugarcoat it. It was like, boys, you're not good enough. And we worked really hard and we kept working. And this year we started the year 2-0. And I mean, that first victory, the kids, you would have thought we won the World Series. I mean, the hats were flying. I mean, people were just freaking out. And the joy of it was actually, I think, multiplied because of what we went through. We went through a really hard year last year, and the kids in the off season worked hard, and we worked. The level of focus and practice was different coming into this year, and then we won. And again, that was good for them. It was good for Donovan, even as a 9-year-old, to lose every game. Was it fun? No. Was it disheartening at times? Yes. Were there so many lessons? Absolutely. And those lessons now are bearing fruit in different areas, and we can reference them. And I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle.
It is. Well, Pete, thank you for joining us today. We have a lot more to unpack in your book, though. I really like your fact that, if men are listening out there right now, life an adventure. It really should be an adventure. Everything we do should be an adventure. I mean, we're only allowed so many days on Earth. So would you come and join us for a second podcast? Because we got a lot more to unpack.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think guys should buy the book and read the book before the second podcast so that then they can come even more prepared. That'd be perfect.
On purpose. If you have young boys, maybe you've got a grandsons, pass these on to your sons, your grandsons. Very helpful. Let's close in prayer, gentlemen, but don't forget, join us for the next podcast. We got a lot more to break open here. And if you're a grandfather, you definitely want to listen. This is a lot of things you're going to be able to pass on to your kids. So let's close in prayer, gentlemen. In the Father's Spirit. Amen. Holy Mother, Ark of the Covenant, sweet Virgin Mary, Holy Mother of God, my mother, my queen. Saint Joseph, husband of Mary, servant of God, true man, just man, terror of demons. We come before you today and we ask for each of our listeners, their families and friends. Please cover them in your Son's precious blood of protection. Fill them with irresistible grace. Give them a thirst for your Son Jesus, that they would come to know him, love him, and serve him in this world, that we all one day may adore and glorify him forever in the next.